Very warm welcome to everybody tonight to the Highams Park Society's Autumn Talk, the Warner family and Highams Park. You may have noticed from the previous slide that there are a lot of family connections with names connected with the Warner family and their building work. When we say the name Warner in connection with this part of London, I think for most people the first thing that comes to mind is the Warner Estate or the Warner Half House Flats. That Warner Estate was a very, very big part of people's lives in mainly Walthamstow and Leighton for a large part of 100 years. In this talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about who the Warners were, explain why they were so significant, not just locally, but also in this part of the world, and also in the life of England in a wider sense. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Warners' life and their time at Highams, which is the building which is now Woodford County High School, and finally the Warners' impact on the development of Highams Park. And when I say Highams Park, I'm using that not in a loose sense, but the Warners' part of Highams Park includes the Highams estate, Highams itself, the White House, and also a little bit of the land at the top of the avenue. So when I say Highams Park, that area in fact has a Woodford Green postcode. It was all in Walthamstow, and I will explain a bit about that later. I'm just going to go through 4 definitions. It feels like I'm in the classroom, I'm afraid, but I didn't want to assume everybody knew everything about 5 terms that I'm going to use, because I had to look some of these up to really find the detail. The Warners were, and still are, lords of the manor being the manor of Higham Benstead. More about that later. Lord of the Manor is a hereditary title that involves inheriting land. The first lords of the manor in England were Saxon lords of the manor. Our Lord of the Manor here in 1065, just before the Norman Conquest, was a man named Haldon, a Saxon freeman. But the title Lord of the Manor has continued, and the inherited rights have continued to this day. Lord of the Manor is not a title that relates to nobility, but again, as I've reiterated, is a title that relates to the hereditary right over a section of usually a large piece of land, or a large sort of connection of land. Highams. When I say Highams, I mean the house, and that is Highams built in 1768 for a very wealthy city banker, John Harmon, which is where we get Harmon clothes from. So John Harmon had Highams built. The manor actually stretched from roughly where Woodford Primary School is, nearly all the way to Black Horse Road Station. So it was a very, very extensive manor, the manor of Higham Benstead. The original manor house was called Higham Hall, later called Essex Hall. You might remember a block of probably flats. I think it was an old people's home run by Waltham Forest Council. That was built on the site of the old manor house. And if you try and strip away the houses and factories, but just think of how different the land is. Both on high points, one in Higham Hill, the old manor house, the new manor house, Woodford County High School, on a real high point. And again, I'll talk a bit about that later, because the situation of Highams was one of the reasons why the Warners came here. It is actually 211 feet above sea level, so a very elevated position. I don't know if you've ever managed to go to the top of that building. I haven't, but there are some views from other buildings on that ridge of Woodford that give you all sorts of incredible views. Thirdly, the manor of Higham Benstead. The name of the manor changed over the years. Peckham was a Saxon name. Higham Benstead was its last name, I would say. Again, the manor stretched from here, roughly all the way to Black Horse Lane. Salisbury Hall Manor was carved out of it in the 15th century. So the manor, although stretching quite far, had a bit in the middle missing. I've got a map to show you. Walthamstow. We think of Walthamstow meaning an East 17 postal district. But Walthamstow, the borough of Walthamstow, included Highams Park, the area we're in now, E4. It included the Highams Estate, Woodford Green, E4. That part of the Woodford Green postal district was also in Walthamstow. Walthamstow was a local government district in the late 1800s, and by 1894 it was a borough, it was an urban district. Walthamstow received its borough charter in 1929. Again, I'm saying that because there's a big connection with the Warners. And then finally, baronets. The Warner family are baronets. Nothing to do with Highams Park, in fact. The title was conferred upon the one of the current Lord Himana's descendants, and it was conferred in 1910. Baronetcy is a title I don't think given very often now. I think Mark Thatcher is a baronet. Nothing to do with me. But I think Dennis Thatcher was given the unusual title of baronet. And that is a title. It's a lesser noble title. It means you inherit the title Sir. Your wife can be called Lady, and again, it's an inherited title. It's very, very rarely given today, but it is a title in the gift of the crown, meaning the government of the day, I think. Who were the Warners? Can anyone recognise where this building is still? What building is this? Bottom of the High Street, absolutely. This building is Clock House. And before I talk about the Warners and Clock House, I mentioned a man named Edward Warner. And with the Warners, you might need to buy the book because they all share the same, not the same names, but they seem to recycle family names continually. So one Edward Warner, 1730, born in 1730, was a wealthy city merchant. The Warner family came from Essex, somewhere outside Hampstead. They were of, the old history books say they were of Essex stock. I'm not going to say that, but that's what the old history books say. By the 18th century, the Warners, different branches of the Warner family, were living both in Leighton and in Walthamstow. This house was bought by a Warner, by Edward Warner, in fact, as a statement. It's very hard to imagine this house now. It is behind what was, I think, it was a co-op office for many years. There's a big Turkish supermarket at the bottom of the high street, and it's behind there. But the house would have had a drive right up to Marsh Street, which is our high street now, and was a very pretty house. Spent a lot of money on it because the bricks are unusual. They are Suffolk white bricks, and in the early 1800s, when the house was built, these bricks would have had to have been taken down the coast from Suffolk, down the Thames, up the River Lee. So it tells you something about the wealth of the Warner family. An Edward Warner went to Wadham College in the 1830s. That was the son of the first Edward Warner. He became a barrister. He was also a fellow of the Royal Society of Geographers. He had a number of worthy pursuits, including he was Deputy Lieutenant of Essex, and he was a JP for Middlesex, Westminster and Essex as well. He stood as a Liberal MP for Norwich, which he represented for a number of years. And it's interesting, there were two Warners who lived in Walthamstow, but one lived at Highams, and originally Edward Warner lived at Clock House. This building was called Clock House. Both represented seats a long way away. I do wonder what they were doing for their constituents. It was taking a very long time to get to Norwich. This is really in the early days of the train, the Eastern Counties Railway. But he was a Liberal MP for Norwich, and Edward Warner was said to have been the wealthiest man in the House of Commons. It gives you an idea of the wealth of the Warner family, even as far back as the 1830s. There's a map here of the manor of Highams. Now we are roughly, we are here. We're here. Highams is there. Highams is at the top here. Woodford Borough boundaries there. The roads on the left are Highams Station Avenue, Marlborough, Nelson. Can you see the manor goes right the way around to part of Walthamstow, past Holly Lane. There's an interesting sort of extension. I haven't looked this up. It looks very complicated. But it's the yellow line that gives the outline of the manor of High Benstead. Salisbury Hall was carved out of the middle of the manor, but the manorial lands actually stretched around it. Highams. In 1849, this is an early plan for Highams. It wasn't built exactly in this way, but Highams came up for sale in 1849 after the death of John Harmon the banker. It included 326 acres of parkland, landscaped by the very well-known landscape architect Humphrey Repton. Humphrey Repton is in fact the only real person mentioned in any of Jane Austen's novels. In Mansfield Park he appears, the clever Mr. Repton appears to design a garden there. But Humphrey Repton was here, and his parkland is what we enjoy to this day. Included with the purchase of Highams was the title of Lord of the Manor, Lord of the Manor of Higham Benstead. So the Warner family, Edward Warner, by buying Highams, was buying a lot more than just a house. He also had the living of St Mary's Church in Walthamstow. So in terms of Lords of the Manor and manorial rights, I think you'd agree that it was quite a significant purchase. Edward Warner married a lady called Maria Carr. She was of Anglo-Irish background, and they had two sons. Their two sons are quite important in our story about the Warners. The first son, Edward, very sadly died of infancy, but it was their second son, Thomas Courtney Thaden Warner, who was born in 1857, who became a very, very significant character in the development of the life of Walthamstow and the development of Highams Park. You can see the figures of population for the borough of Walthamstow. 1861, Walthamstow was a collection of rural Epping Forest hamlets, really. Church End, Chapel End, Hale End, population in total of only 7,000. By 1881, that population had more than trebled, connected with the building of Post Street Station, the railway line up to Sherne Hall Street, which was then extended by 1873 to Hale End. And just remember, Hale End was built as a temporary station and wasn't called Highams Park until later. Again, it's connected with our story. And just one more thing about Highams. I mentioned before the superb position, 211 feet above sea level. If you are able to go to the top of Highams, you can see, it is possible to see the hills of Hertfordshire. You can see Highgate. Epping Forest stretches to the north-northeast. You can also see the North Downs. It's an incredible view. It's an absolutely incredible view. So that's, again, what they were buying when Highams was purchased. An absolutely superb position. Two photographs here, in fact, from the National Portrait Gallery. That's how significant the Warners were. Sir Thomas Courtney Thaden Warner on the left, Lady Lucia Diana Maud, daughter of the first Earl of Montfort. She died, she predeceased Sir Courtney Warner. I'm going to call him Courtney Warner because that's what he was known as. And Sir Courtney Warner lived through some significant changes in the life of the nation and the way in which people lived. And he was to actually shape the way people lived in Walthamstow through his work. He inherited the manor when he was only 18 years old. He was only 18 years old in 1875, which meant he didn't take possession of the manor until he was 21, the age of majority. So, this very, very young man took possession of a manor consisting of extensive land, and also a manor where the railway various railway companies had built lines across. He borrowed £1,000 from one of his uncles. So Courtney Warner borrowed £1,000 from one of his uncles to build houses. At this time in Walthamstow, many of the landowners were selling off parts of land, strips of land or fields of land, and they were selling them to any old developer, literally any old developer. And some very, very poor quality housing ended up being put up in Walthamstow. Courtney Warner, however, had a different idea about housing and about the way in which people should live. And he decided to have those houses built himself. So he oversaw the development of streets, he oversaw the building of sewers, and again with this £1,000 started really the Warner Estate Company. He borrowed another further £10,000, the developments went very, very well. And that really was the beginning of the development of the Warner Estate as we know it in the Walthamstow part of Waltham Forest, the half-house flats. Courtney Warner. A little bit about him, because I think if we understand some of the things he did, it gives us an idea of why this part of Highams Park, or I say this part, the Highams Estate, looks the way it does. He went to Eton, went to Brasenose. He went up to Brasenose College in Oxford. He was a great rower. He was very, very political. He was a member of the National Liberal Club and various other liberal organisations, and stood as a liberal. He stood first of all for Coventry, failed to become elected for Coventry. That was in 1885. In 1883, he had married Lady Diana Maud, a society beauty. And it was in 1896 that Courtney Warner, the Lord of the Manor, who was resident here at Highams, became MP for Lichfield in Staffordshire. Again, I think in the modern age it's a strange concept, living so far away. He was a very well-loved MP for Lichfield, and he had that seat from 1896 until 1923. A very, very long time, I would say. He was also a colonel in the Oxford Light Militia. And in 1909, in George V's first birthday honours list, he was given the title of Baronet. Baronet of Brettenham, because by then the Warners had moved to Suffolk. More about that later. The picture here is actually of the unveiling of Clare's War Memorial. I don't know if you know Clare in Suffolk, just west of Long Melford. He was a very notable person in Suffolk, as well as his part of the world.